Okay, we are live.
All right. Hello. I'm Pastor Keven. I am a progressive Christian pastor. I am ordained through a liberal Baptist church. Yes, they do exist. Called Covenant of the Cross. And I'm here to talk to you today about Home for the Holidays. How to share a holiday meal with people who don't share your holidays. Much like one in five of the people living in the U.S., I live in a religiously blended family. I am obviously a Christian pastor, but at the same time, I live with our Maple member.
Maple.
Maple. That's what I said.
You said Mabel.
Oh, sorry.
This
Our
isn't
Maple,
Gravity Falls.
much to my chagrin. Maple member Alyssa Johnson Glassell. Been happily married to a neo-pagan for the past 18 years. Let's see. A little bit about me. Wanted to be a lawyer when I grew up. And so went to law school. Then discovered I'd be working with other attorneys and quickly decided to get some religion. And so I entered seminary. Unlike a number of our pastors, in that I was well acquainted with evidence and argumentation when I went in. If you want to feel sorry for anybody, feel sorry for the poor theology professor that suddenly found himself cross-examined on a daily basis. I only did that to a couple of people, and they deserved it. So, I often tell people that seminary saved my marriage, because it did. There was information that I'm not gonna say that we keep from our fellow church people, but I will say that it just never manages to work its way down totally.
Hi, John.
Hi, John. and because of that, that helped me overcome a lot of, I guess, what I was scared of. Being married to a neo-pagan. And we're going to discuss how to overcome those things in a family situation here in just a little bit. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you guys are seeing this at home, because if you're on the road, A, it's snowing out, and B, well, you need to drive and not look at a camera. But I hope you guys are staying safe, and I was going to have this be a little audience interactive, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So I was going to ask if people were out of the broom closet yet, and if so, how did that go when your families found out? I can tell you that I've been part of some fairly nasty fights. I recently, I may or may not have recently told my aunt that she's a Nazi.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't tell her that she was a Nazi. I implied it heavily.
Yes, you did.
But I mean, these things are family's difficult, and it can be difficult to, on the one hand, try to have a loving relationship, but at the same time remain true to who you are. And we're going to be talking about that here right now. So when I say how to share a holiday meal with people who don't share your holidays, what I'm really talking about is overcoming emotional inertia within the family to achieve a just peace. Now what's a just peace? It's the opposite of what we normally have in a family. We do have peace in the family, but it's usually at somebody else's expense. Like, for instance, you've got racist Uncle Frank who tells off-colored jokes, especially when Terry's African-American husband is around, right? So that's not a just peace. We're looking for something where everybody can be honest, everybody can be who they are as a person, but still enjoy relating to your family members. That's what we're going to shoot for. So, okay, that's just peace. Well, what's emotional inertia, and why do we have to overcome it? Well, oh, sorry, I'm rocking the boat.
You're rocking the table a little too much.
So, emotional inertia. Let me explain to you what that is via a story. Okay, so as a pastor, got people that come up to me all the time. Most of the time, they tell very off-color jokes. I don't know what's up with that.
You like them?
Quiet, you. But people sometimes they'll come up and say, Pastor Keven, are you pro-life? Well, and I say yes, but biblically. And they're like, what? Well, I'm like, Numbers 28 has an abortion. It actually calls for an abortion in certain instances. The woman is to take what we translate as bitter water. That seems to be an apothecary term for a mild poison. And what happens then, of course, is the baby is, the fetus is flushed out because of that shock to the woman's system. And I say, well, that teaches us that there are instances where the life of the mother is more important than the life of the fetus. And this is, in fact, what was quoted all the time back in the 50s.
Hello, Deanne.
Hi, Deanne. This was quoted by conservative evangelicals in the 50s. This was, in fact, nothing new. And then I go on. We'll add a little science. The child doesn't technically have the brain function to be declared dead until about 6 months into the pregnancy. And given that Jesus doesn't talk about abortions at all, but Jesus does say to value children, I obviously want, I want every pregnancy to be healthy, but at the same time, it's very very obvious that if the mother can't do it, it's not my place to judge.
John was saying that his father won't speak with him at all about his druidry, but his mother is fascinated with it. And as he says here, she'd love to be a druid too if she wasn't so afraid of God.
Well, don't be afraid. God loves you. I'm hoping that'll be clear by the end of this. But no, that is very cool, John. Very cool. So where was I? Yes, emotional inertia. So I go through all of that with them. And then they go, wow, Pastor Keven, thank you for giving a much more concise and broad understanding of that biblical topic for these very turbulent times.
Nope.
No, they don't. They don't remotely do that. They vomit all over you, they vomit over the person next to you, and they vomit on everybody out the front door of your church. That's emotional inertia. It is when you become so emotionally invested into something for a period of years that listening becomes impossible. No matter what arguments you use, no matter where those arguments come from, even if it's from your scriptures, or the evidence you provide. So that's emotional inertia, and that is 100% the number one obstacle to a just peace in a family. It's because there are some people who are so attached to certain things that they just can't let it go. And it just so happens to pop up in the family. So, how do we overcome emotional inertia towards positive change? Well, change requires three things. It requires knowledge. We're going to go into some of that tonight. It requires values, and it requires time. With those three, that's how you affect change. Now I've got to be upfront. Knowledge is 1/3 of this equation. If you don't constantly work toward good values for yourself, and you aren't willing to put in the time and frankly the sacrifice to see positive change, it's not going to happen. I can fill you up with all the knowledge in the world, and if you're not, but you have not love, right? Then we are a clanging gong. So, three things: knowledge, values, time. And we're going to go into now some of those knowledge pieces. What do we have to know to overcome those obstacles? And but before we get in there, I do want to give a disclaimer. Some families are toxic. Some are just toxic. If you your safety is the most important part of this equation. If you feel threatened bodily, or you simply can't handle it mentally, or there are some families that will break your spirit. This takes wisdom. This takes intuition, but you'll know.
Say hi, Diane.
Hi, Diane. If your family is a threat to your existence, whether physically, mentally, or spiritually, don't engage. Don't engage. So, but with that said, we also, on the other hand, need to be careful about who we abandon the microphone to, so to speak, right? Homophobic Uncle Fred. I'm going to pick on him. All right? He may be terrible to deal with, and certainly if he doesn't, if you aren't safe being around him, don't be around him. But if you can, be around him and confront him. Show those good boundaries, because if you don't, if you disappear,
Lori's like, I think I know him.
we all know him.
Cognitive disconnect by Diane says.
Yeah. If if we let give homophobic Uncle Fred our silence, our acquiescence, then when little cousin Timmy comes out, he's taking all the brunt, and that's not fair to him. So stay safe, but if you can be in the family, do so. Be that positive influence, because your family's going to need it. As one of the things, Kevin, why is the church having such a tough time? Well, it's because the good people won't be a part of it. I know that firsthand.
Yeah.
So, moving on. So, what are the typical obstacles between neo-paganism and the church? Well, we don't have time for all of that tonight.
Yeah.
But let's start with some three pretty big ones. First, our past history. It's not good. Both of us see the other as kind of the oppressor, and even as the annihilator. We see each side is the other one's trigger word, right? If I'm in a group of Wiccans and I say Christian, not very good things come up. If I am at church and I say the word pagan, same thing.
Or they have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, let's not talk about our family. Okay, so.
Oh, hi, Paul, and he says fire and gasoline.
Fire and gasoline.
That's what we're going to use. No, anyway.
So one, we've got a past history to talk about. Two, we have pretty big differences between polytheism and monotheism. Now, obviously, everybody's different, but as a generality, the church says there's one God, and polytheists and most neo-pagans will come out and say, no, you have one God. And so, how are we going to bridge that? Third, we also just have fundamentally different approaches to life, worldview differences. In the church, just as a generality, we tend to have what I would call a divine will approach to life. We believe in one God who was a creator, and we believe that adherence to the created order is important. That's one of the reasons it's this approach to doing life and theology and religion that unfortunately resulted into some treating our LGBTQ brothers and sisters pretty poorly. I was going to ask, how many verses have to deal with homosexuality in the Bible? It's a trick question. The answer is none. Homosexuality is a 19th century concept. It's not even a word until, I can't even remember, it's some dude in Germany. Because why not? But if I'm a first century apostle writing a first century letter in first century Judea, I'm not using 19th century German terms, am I? So, but why do we read...
Hi, Molly.
Hi, Molly. Why do we read? Why do Christians read that into the Bible? Well, because we have a certain worldview that the created order is sacred, or at least our perceptions of it are sacred, and men do certain things and women do certain things, and that's from God, or at least that's the view. Having been in and amongst neo-pagans for 18 years now, you guys are awesome. By the way, just shouting out. Whereas in the church we have a divine will motif, that in neo-paganism there's often a my will motif. There's a belief that I, as an individual, am sovereign, and it's not about adhering to the creative order, but it is knowing how to relate to the created order so I can be sovereign alongside of it. I'm an independent being myself. And because we've got those two different approaches, we have two different approaches to the supernatural. We have, within the church, any proper supernatural act is miracle. Humans were made a certain way by God. It's obvious, and by obvious, I don't mean obvious, I mean easy to believe that God didn't create us to do supernatural acts. Therefore, miracle is the only.
Thank you.
Miracle is the purview of God that sometimes we get to participate in. With that said, with a neo-paganism, given that sovereignty piece, I myself am sovereign. I myself am divine, and therefore I myself participate in the supernatural. And so, whereas the church often believes in miracles, neo-paganism practices magic. They participate in the supernatural as just part of who they are. So, those are the three big obstacles that I think if we can cross them, that we'll come a lot closer to bridging the gap between neo-paganism and the church. So, okay. Rising above these walls. That may or may not be a Trump dig.
Lori's asking, what about Jewish mysticism?
Jewish mysticism. I can't speak to individual medieval to modern practices like the Kabbalah. I'm not a practitioner myself. What I will be doing is talking about what's going on with magic and miracle in the biblical settings. So as far as Jewish mysticism goes, as far as me personally, if it makes you into a better person, then do it. Because we need those good people. So, rising above these walls. Concerning our past history, we really need to realize that we are the inheritors, not the slaves, to the choices of our ancestors. I think that's really important. Does the church have its ancestors? Yes. We don't talk about it, but seeing as this is December 1st, the War on Christmas stuff is about to come out. And that War on Christmas stuff, that is absolutely about the vaunted tradition of our ancestors. The people who complain about it, they don't have a religious reason to do so. They can't point to, oh yes, and Jesus said, get them Starbucks for taking Merry Christmas, because despite it wasn't actually a church holiday till like the 3rd century. Um, so
Diane had said, and therein lies the part of the issue is the dogma, church dogma is men oppressing women.
that is absolutely a huge issue, Diane. I mean, it is. And unfortunately, the church has its own emotional inertia on these things. And I'm in contact with a number of female pastors, and I've got one that's down in Georgia, and she is treated like garbage, and it's terrible. So, but again, we can do something or we can do nothing, and I've chosen to do something. So, that past history, even evangelicals have their vaunted ancestors, and we have to say that, I appreciate the good that you've done, but I'm going to stop you at the toxic stuff that you're doing that's hurting others. The abuse, I have to speak out about the abuse. So we have to realize that our tendency is to view the traditions of our ancestors as a pinnacle, or more accurately, often a ceiling. We need to see it more as a stepping stool. It's to lift us up, not keep us down. So, given that, we have the power of choice, we can continue the choices of our ancestors, or we can part with them. One of the things that we need to realize is each side viewing the other as annihilator is a recipe for terrible, terrible evil. If those of us who believe in being moral and believe in peace, when we see a situation like that, we have to enter into it. We have to talk. Because the minute the talking stops, the bullets start every time. So, we have to realize that each side having this problematic history and viewing the other as evil, we've got to talk about that. Because if we don't, we're going to see people not saying that you're evil. People are going to say you're evil, therefore I'm going to do evil, and that's what we want to stop. So not only that, but we also have to realize there's false equivalencies going on that are inherent in the arguments of both sides. Christians say the pagans want to kill us. The pagans say the Christians want to kill us. There are false equivalencies happening there. What's a false equivalency? That's a bit of logic. I know. The reason why you guys went into magic in the first place was to not have to attend logic class.
Ha ha ha.
But a false equivalency is saying, a star is a burning ball of gas in space. Miley Cyrus is a star. Therefore, Miley Cyrus is a burning ball of gas taking up space, right?
That's a possibility. No, I'm kidding. I'm so joking.
So
My apologies.
That's a false equivalency. I'm saying I'm in fact describing two different things, and so Christians calling the indigenous religious practices of certain religions.
She is full of hot air. People are laughing at that. That was pretty good.
So Christians have to realize that that pagans, the people who believe in continuing the indigenous religious practices of their culture, they are not Roman institutionalized religion. The two are separate, right? And while, yes, Christianity was for a time suffered terrible martyrdoms under Roman religious institutions, that's not you guys, right? Okay, there's no point in attributing the Celts with Rome, because I know the Celts and Rome got along like that. Right? Just, bros.
BFFs, man.
BFFs. I think Boudica's gonna kill me. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, and on the other hand, so Christians have to realize that they're two different things. On the other hand, too, I remember the only side story, the only biblical witch, after taking an attorney and going over and learning like the evidence, the archaeology, the cultures of the people that produced the Bible, as long, for all the time I've been in amongst neo-pagan circles, I've met exactly one biblical witch. And her name was Shannon. I hope she's doing well. Kind of a sad figure. And, she knew I was going to seminary, and she said, I can't stand the church. They did terrible, terrible things. I can't stand Christians. And I'm like, the church and Christians are two different things. Well, what do you mean? A Christian is supposed to act like Christ, right? Well, yeah. Then how do you say that Christians did those things? So, we have to realize that, again, the institutions that are oppressing people, and I fully realize and understand and know that we've got the power in this situation, and we're the ones that have to do something about it. But again, don't conflate, or whatever the word is. Don't make me the equal of the 700 Club.
Barf.
We're two different people. The church as it is now is not a first century Jewish reform movement. As a matter of fact, everybody in that movement would take a look at what the church has become and say that the heretics are in charge.
Thanks for coming on in, Emma.
Hi, Emma. So, all right. So, we have to realize that it's a dangerous situation where both see the other as evil. We have to realize that there are false equivalencies going on in the arguments from both sides. And we also have to take the step and say any ancestor who doesn't want us to be better than them is toxic and selfish. Any ancestor that wants us to carry on their hatred, their anger, their
toxic thoughts,
their bias, their selfishness, we have to stop them. Again, we can say, I am thankful for what you have given me. I am thankful for the good that you have done. I'm not cursing myself or my children with that toxicity.
Ramen.
So, again, the traditions of those we inherited from, they are pillars to stand on. If they're not pillars to stand on, they very quickly become tombs that we get encased in. So, all right. So that's the past history. That's how we can get past that and say, hey, I understand this that this has been going on. I don't want any part of it. I am in fact a sovereign, free-willed person, and I choose good. I choose good for the future of my humanity. So with that said, that's one thing. So polytheism versus monotheism. How are we going to rectify that? Alyssa talked me out of this. You can thank her later. I was going to go over ancient Mesopotamian creation stories in Genesis. She said that might take a little too long.
Just a tish.
So we're going to shorten it up. This one's actually phenomenally easy. The Bible has the Christian God as polytheism. The Christian God has a plural name. It's the first name of God in the Bible. It's Elohim. It is big G, O-D-S. That's his name. Gods. We find this Elohim principle throughout the scriptures. It isn't just like something they threw out there. There's a whole.
Sorry, Lori thanking me.
I said later. This Elohim principle of God we see in the scriptures in multiple ways. First, God appears in multiples. Right. This is this is those we and us sections in Genesis. It is out of Elohim that we get Trinity from. Our concept of the Trinity. We see God as both male and female in the scriptures. First Peter says, "Now that you have tasted and seen that God is good, crave pure spiritual milk." This is a breastfeeding reference. And I don't lactate, so I mean, TMI, sorry. So, okay, Peter's a Jew. Where did he get that from? He got that from his Hebrew scriptures. This really ticks off my conservative friends. So I apologize to them if they're watching, but oh well. There is a feminine name for God. It's El Shaddai. Shad is the Hebrew word for breast, and when they say El Shaddai, they're saying our Mother Almighty. And every time that El Shaddai appears in the Hebrew scriptures, it's about fertility. So, where did Peter get that? That we can do breastfeeding references for God? Well, because God's female, and God can be male and female because God is Elohim.
So there was a comment here from Deanne that you are the first Christian she's heard ever acknowledge this.
I'm sorry, and I'm not being funny. That I'm sorry. And again, for whatever reason, this information just never seems to get down to the people that need it, and that's an indictment on us. It really is. So God can be male and female. Why? Because God is Elohim. God is pantheon. And there are also a number of times in Scripture where God is pagan gods. When Abraham meets up with Melchizedek, and he tithes to Melchizedek, kneels before Melchizedek. Who is Melchizedek? He's described as Melchizedek, priest of God Most High. That's really misleading. The Hebrew is God. He's the priest of El Elyon. El Elyon is not God Most High. El Elyon is the king Canaanite deity of the Canaanites. But Abraham's tithing to him as if he's the priest of his God. How can that happen? God is pantheon. I think the most
You're right, Paul.
The most telling, or it's easiest to see God as Elohim, is in the where Moses confronts Pharaoh. Moses and Pharaoh, they're in the same room together, and Moses says, "Let my people go." And what he does is he takes his staff, and it becomes a snake. What's the snake to the Egyptians? Well, Pharaoh wears a snake. He doesn't wear the snake because he's king. He wears it because he's a god. The snake is a theological symbol to the Egyptians. And everything that happens afterward, from blocking out the sun to the frogs, the frogs were associated with the goddess of healing, but instead of healing, they're now bringing harm. Everything that happens in that story, that smiting, is if the Egyptians were being cursed by their own gods. So with the Nile turning to blood, we actually have ancient records of this, and yeah, they thought Osiris did that. So again, this is the Bible. Actually, if you studied, this is easy stuff. So to make it clear, biblically speaking, when the Jews said the pagan gods are false, okay, they're false in the same way that your thumb is a false hand. Okay, it's not that your thumb does not exist, but rather the reality of what the Hebrews were trying to talk about was bigger, right? So, now, how come they just didn't say that, Kevin? Well, because literally that word wasn't invented until the 1950s. That word is paradigm shift. So sometimes humans are like incredible, and other times it's like, really? The 50s? But we are who we are. So as far as that polytheism, monotheism, it's easy for an educated type Christian person like me to cross that bridge. The other thing that we need to carry in mind is that strict monotheism and strict polytheism run into problems. Now, it's one thing to kind of have that as a personal belief system, and oftentimes that works out fine. But when you take that and apply it to the public, take the personal belief system and make it a public theology, you run into real problems, right? So in strict monotheism, you're going to see this all. You're going to see this all over the place because we're living it right now. But in strict monotheism, this always leads to the God of the greatest common denominator, right? Okay, you got a people. There's one God. Great. What's that God like? Well, I don't know. What'll get you to show up in the pew, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, if there's one God, it's going to naturally be the God that makes you the most money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in our white patriarchal culture, is it any shock that people understand God to be this cranky old white guy? Why? Because you'll give that God money, or he'll smite you. That's why. So whenever you have a strict monotheism, when you apply that to a public theology, you end up with this God who's nothing more than a cultural enforcer, right? And it ends and at the end of the day, it also ends up sabotaging itself because you end up creating atheists and pagans. So there's one God. Great. What's he like? Well, he's like this. And once you say, well, he's like this, you've created an entire class of people who are going to A, say, well, I guess there's no God then. Or B, that's not the God I'm talking to. There must be multiple gods. So that's what happens in a strict monotheism. In a strict polytheism, we run into problems like that too. In strict polytheism, we always seem to end up, once again, if we take that personal belief system and make it a public theology, it always leads to the gods that seem to have the worst qualities of the humans that worship them. Okay, there's multiple gods. Okay, well, what are those gods like? Well, they're finite. Well, why are they finite? Because one can't start until the other ends. Well, if they're finite, they must need to eat. If you read Atrahasis, you see that they believe Mesopotamian gods. They ate the burnt sacrifices. That's how they ate. And you end up with some really strange things happening. Like if you study ancient Middle Eastern anointing techniques when you're making a temple, it's kind of funny and kind of sad at the same time. What they do is they go to a sacred place and they literally try to bait the god with food. They bait them with food to bring them into the temple where a ritual comes in, and they hope that the god will say, "Oh, they want me here." So, if the gods need to eat, well, that means they can die, which means they can make war on each other, which often means that they don't really care that much about their human followers, save that they get fed at their regular intervals. This was very, very common in the ancient Middle East. So, it really creates a very unloving kind of atmosphere and makes relating to one's God very difficult. So whenever you so strict monotheism, strict polytheism, whether you want to fall off the left side of the cliff or the right, we have to acknowledge that there are problems that we get when we do that. So how do we overcome that? Let's change the conversation, right? Instead of getting hung up on things that, quite frankly, we don't know. Okay, whatever is going on up there, out there, right here with divinity, it's very clear that our ability to see it isn't like our ability to see this table or each other, right? Those questions are just far too complex for monotheism and polytheism to be helpful terms. So what I recommend is instead of talking about monotheism and polytheism, we use the terms unity and diversity. Do you see the divine as unified, like I do, or do you see it as diversity? Do you see multiple? And one is going to be your gift, and the other is going to be your challenge. Well, why do you need both? Because bad things happen if you don't have these together. Unity without diversity is fascism. We're seeing that all over the place, and
It kind of makes a we and us versus them sort of thing, is what you're saying. Those polarities.
Those polarities, do, yes, they make an us versus them, and I just don't know that's helpful. So Hitler was a Christian, and
I'm definitely curious what happens when you bring up the problematic nature of strict monotheism with fellow Christians.
They say, thank you, Pastor Keven, for that biblical analysis, and that, thank you for providing a much broader... No, they vomit all over you.
Kind of like what zookeepers do. So who were the keepers then, the gods or the temple priests? With the baiting of bringing the gods into the temple and that sort of thing.
It would have been the priests, yep.
Yeah, so, okay.
Yep. And, but that's what they thought. So, now, obviously, no false equivalencies. I know you guys aren't doing that, and so, but anyway, doesn't matter. So, I say let's talk about the lens with which we approach the divine. Do you approach it with through the lens of unity? In which case, your lens is going to, your challenge is going to be diversity. My challenge was to see God as something other than the God I was given. I've seen God in multiple different ways. I've seen Jesus. I don't know if that's how he actually looked, but I see God as light. I've experienced God as mother. I've also experienced God in the way that John of the Cross did, as nothing. And as most mystical traditions, that's where it always ends up, in nothing. Not because God is nothing, but because nothing describes it.
Diana's saying both unity and diversity, which is a pantheism.
Yeah.
Okay, so the term that most new pagans are going to know is pantheism.
Again, we might get... vocabulary is always difficult. I believe in a transcendent pantheism, if that makes any sense. And at least as I was taught, pantheism always ends in ends in the world, right? God is the world. I think I believe that God is more, that divinity is more, and that might be completely on par with your understanding of pantheism. It might not. I don't know. We can talk about it. So, anyway, so I've had to challenge myself with diversity, and on the other hand, we also I would argue that diversity without unity is anarchy. If everybody is just individuals and there is no unified purpose, that means nobody gets helped. That's a survival of the fittest kind of scenario, and I don't think that's very good either. So we talk about unity and diversity, and we also talk about the difference between theology and zoology. Okay, we all have our liturgy. We call whenever we start our religious practices, we call God, the gods, divinity into a specific shape or form. And we use those metaphors to relate to it, right? Because as human beings, that's what we have to do. So there's liturgy, and then we've got to do theology, not zoology, with that. So what do I mean by that? What am I talking about with zoology here? if you are coming into a mystical experience and you say, "Hey, I had this experience out in the wilderness. I was met by this being who appears and then disappears, forming a physical self without itself being physical. It speaks without air vibrations, thinks without a nervous system, was everywhere at once and yet somehow managed to move. And it most definitely had boobs or a penis."
Thank you, Pastor Kevin, for the theological.
You know, if we walk, when I die, I use terms like God, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Trinity. I know that when I die and I go up to the pearly gates and I finally meet that reality, okay, there's not a bearded, tri-headed amoeba monster there waiting for me, right? I understand that these are, when I use the term God.
Okay. Pantheism says that God is everything in the universe which goes beyond this planet and humanity. So maybe pantheism is, again, but
Yeah.
we're discussing the understandings of the word as well, Diane. So, I mean, thank you for giving us that information.
Yeah.
That's actually very helpful to the conversation.
Yes.
Yes.
So when I, instead of saying that, instead of being overly obsessed with divine genitalia, maybe we can be honest and just talk about, when we use the term God, it's an operational metaphor. It's a metaphor for a reality that we experience but don't really understand and probably can't. So, if we start talking in these terms, it's very easy to breach that polytheism, monotheism gap.
Emma here says, you don't have to discuss it now, but I want this in your head. Is atheism or soft polytheism problematic? For example, learning from the various mythologies and using the ideas of the gods as archetypes for inspirations. It's something we should.
Yeah, I'll answer that right now. Okay, spoiler alert. The Bible is not a rule book. It says this actually in multiple places. You don't arrange 66 different stories containing myths, love poetry, songs, and personal letters because you think you're making a rule book. It has lessons to teach. And do I think it matters if we teach those same lessons with different myths, like using different archetypes and different gods? I think God cares about us. And I think He cares more about the lessons being learned, and whether you learn "Thou shalt not murder" from Exodus or from an Aesop's fable. I think God cares more that you just learn the lesson. So that's my off-the-cuff response. So, okay, now let's get into worldview differences, right? That we've got kind of in the church this divine will approach to life, and within neo-paganism, generally speaking, there's a my will approach to life. And one of the things I want to point out right away that both of those are flight responses. They're a reaction to a world that we sense as hostile. We are all raised with a cultural God. If we view that God as safe, then we flee toward them and are loyal, right? And we want to be loyal in any way possible, because if even perhaps being over loyal, like taking taking verses too far, like what happens with "Thou shalt not lie with a man as with a woman." One gender, one sexual position. Clearly, everybody, including transgender people, God hates. So again, if we're raised with that cultural God and we see that God is safe, then we flee towards them. Because we say to ourselves, if I'm not loyal in every possible way I can think of, whether or not it hurts somebody else, then I'm not safe. God won't keep me safe from this big, bad, nasty world. On the other hand, the my will response is what happens when you are raised with that cultural God and you say, hey, this God's not safe. In which case, what you do is you flee away from that cultural God and you maintain your own independence there. I think that's important to bring up because both are flight responses, and religion that never evolves past a fear response is toxic. You know, we have to get beyond it. The other thing that we have to do here also is we can't constantly be attributing modern culture to those ancient cultures, right? I can't, I've seen evangelical after evangelical say, "Oh yeah, Jesus hates gays." Really? Have you read Jesus? But they believe it. They believe that everything that they're doing now was 100% what Jesus was teaching out on the plains of Judea, 100%. But what they're doing is they're taking a hold of the past, seeing what they want to in it, and then glomming it onto themselves because that gives them power, right? I can, suddenly what I do is not my will; it's the will of God, right? The reason why I'm treating you like crap is because my religion says so. So evangelicals do it. I've seen liberal Christians do it. But on the other hand, in neo-paganism, we've got Margaret Murray, Gerald Gardner. It's in Druidism, Iolo, I cannot pronounce his last name. Mord something. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Cultural sensitivity with Pastor Keven. Anyway, we all have to admit that we're guilty of this. We can't continue to attribute what we want to see in the past as the past. They're two different things. So, given that, right? Given that, how do we? What's going on in the ancient world concerning magic and miracle? I'll be completely honest with you. I don't like magic, miracle, witch. I think that those things have been. We live in a fairly, very cool, by the way, fantasy. A culture where fantasy works like Lord of the Rings, etc., are highly influential. I love these works, but at a certain point, I don't know that because of this. When I say the word magic and miracle, we're attributing very modern understandings that don't really exist yet, and that's why I don't like using them. So let's talk about the ancient understandings of, let's call it the art of possibility, right? Okay, so what's going on in the cultures that are surrounding Israel concerning magic? You got to go to their creation myths. Creation myths back in the day. That's how you did theology. You can't. They're not interesting bits of trivia like today. They are reality. They're your worldview into reality. So if you look at their creation myths, like the Enuma Elish, magic is a weapon of the gods. This is how the gods kill each other. It is used to enact a personal will over another divine will. Magic is meant to thwart the will of the gods. Most often used by another god, but if you're a human being, you can kind of sneak up there and grab one, right? So because there's this understanding in the ancient world of that's what's going on, you get kind of these two factions of the art of the possible, two factions of magic. The first is state-sponsored magic. The gods are distant. They don't want to deal with you. Ares is a big enough problem on his own. I don't need you humans. Because a foreign god might come in and mess things up, I'm going to teach you the magic spells to deal with that foreign god. This is absolutely what's happening. This is why there are the kashef, what gets translated as magician or witch in Leviticus. This is why the magicians are there in Pharaoh's courtroom. It's because, oh, Moses might be bringing a foreign god, so I better have my magicians ready, right? So, so you've got this kind of state-sponsored magic, but then you've got, then you have the problem of, sometimes your own gods are the problem. So what are you going to do with that? I wandered into Loki's flower garden the other day. I've said I'm sorry 1,000,000 times. I just need this curse gone, right? And so sometimes your own gods are the problem, and so you seek out, for lack of a better term, the local witch, right? The one who doesn't really care about this state-sponsored nonsense stuff. So she knows the rituals and the magic spells, etc., to hurt your enemies, find out the will of, force the will of the gods, that kind of stuff. So what are the spells like? The spells are all about force. They're, for lack of a better word, they're kind of like, I don't have a great word for this, but it's almost like date rape. It's about erasing the will of another free-willed thing. Love spells, bindings, true names, all classic understanding of binding something to your will, enslaving it to you. Divination. Divination is not like prayer. It's not just asking your patron to reveal something to you. It's about actually forcing that information up. So many of the magic scrolls that we find in the Mediterranean, they end with commands. Whether it's about winning, we have one for stuff for like winning horse races, but they all end in commands. Do it now, kinds of things.
Thank you, Emma. We'll see you another time.
Bye, Emma. Hope I was helpful. So there's kind of there's that over, that there's that arc to them, and the other thing is that the power lies outside the human. In this understanding, the gods aren't going to create, the beings that are going to replace them. They're not going to make them capable of doing magic on their own. So any magic is outside of the human. It's the power is in the scroll, the power is in the word, the power is in the amulet, that kind of stuff. It's not that you have the power; it's that you through various means you manage to snatch the power. So, okay, this is kind of the understanding of the nations that surround Israel, and this is what this is largely what Israel is reacting to. So, how did Israel react to it? Well, they were all atheists. They didn't believe in supernatural at all, right? No, not at all, not at all. Again, this doesn't really get down to the rank and file, but in the understanding of the Hebrews, humanity was not created as slaves. They're caretakers. They're not at the bottom of the creational heap, right? They're at the top. They were God's idol. An idol in the day was a stone, work of stone, work of earth that housed the divine spirit, and they were made in the image of their God. So if you're at all wondering, well, why did the Hebrews not like idols so much? It's because we're the idol. We're the ones that are supposed to affect God's justice on earth, right? When the Hebrews looked around and saw what everybody else was doing, it's kind of like Nate. Okay, your boss comes to Nate and says, effect justice upon the land. Walk humbly. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And so Nate responds to this by gathering up various office furniture and potted plants, and says, "You are the effector of God's justice. You do justice upon the earth. Walk humbly." that's how they saw it. And biblically speaking, they understand humans as the little g gods. This is stated explicitly in Psalm 82:6. Have I not told you, you are all gods? You are all sons of the Most High? If we also take seriously about how Genesis is kind of reworking the myths of their own time period, the gods live in a paradise, right? They eat a special fruit for their immortality, like the Greek gods in their ambrosia. They were specifically said to have dominion over the earth, the seas, and all the plants and animals, and often were responsible for the first murder. Okay, not often, every time the gods were responsible for the first murder. Well, in Genesis, that's us. So, so their understanding was human beings were supposed to be much, we were supposed to have a much sleeker model to inhabit. And so, take this understanding, and now we're going to go into the New Testament. The word that we let's talk about the words that we describe as to perform miracle. This is really very misleading. The word that we use perform is poeo, okay, and this means to make, to produce, to craft, right? Making something with your hands. And the word that we use, that we translate as miracle, is dunamis. It's the same word that we get dynamo and dynamite from. Well, what's it mean? It's power. That's it. It's literally to craft power, is how they understand what they're doing. And I remember learning that and looking at Alyssa like, what the hell are we going to do with that information? And then let's see, there's a guy called Werner Kahl, German guy, to make up for the other German guy who invented it. So we got Luther, we got Kahl, and so I think two good guys from Germany. We're good. And then there's Hitler, and then never mind. Bonhoeffer, also from Germany. Okay, so Werner Kahl, he wrote a book, and in it, it's pretty much been the understanding of how the Hebrews understood miracle in the first century. There's the kinds of miracle workers. You have bearers of numinous power, is how he describes it. Bearers of numinous power. This is like Jesus. Power is just an act of the will. He just goes and does it. So we see Jesus do that. We see Peter and some disciples in Acts do miracles in that same way, and it's just simply an act of the will.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Hi, Carissa.
Hi, guys.
Have a safe trip home.
Yeah.
Always.
Then you've got mediators of numinous power, right? This is mediators of numinous power. This is like the prophets. This is like Moses sticking his staff into the Nile to change it. Power is being mediated through the human subject, and then you have petitioners of numinous power. This is where a miracle worker is able to have a special relationship and simply ask for the miracle. So to the Hebrews, the ability to perform something supernatural. Again, I don't like the word supernatural. I think it's completely natural. But anyway, the ability to perform the supernatural was more about restoration and empowerment of the human form than it was about getting some secret outside knowledge. And it was about the agreement of wills rather than the thwarting of a will. So that's kind of what's going on with magic and miracle in the ancient Middle East, and this is and these are the understandings that sort of flow into the works of Christian Scripture. Okay, so we've got all of that. And so we're going to head back now. We're going to talk about effecting meaningful change in our houses, in our households, right? So so you go home for the holidays, and then there's Roman Catholic Aunt Petunia, right? You know, is the issue of our disagreements, the issue between neo-paganism and Christianity, is it really that we have nothing in common, nothing to talk about, or is it that Aunt Petunia, this is what she's used to? Aunt Petunia isn't, she doesn't, she's not educated in Middle Eastern languages and cultures. She's not able to interpret the snapshots of faith recorded in their scriptures. She doesn't know anything about archaeological or historical written evidence. Roman Catholic Aunt Petunia is just trying to keep alive a vaunted tradition of her ancestors, but she's also willingly ignorant as to why she's doing that. And that's kind of the issue, but that is the source of that emotional inertia. She's keeping alive something that she's benefited from, right? But at the same time, she doesn't want to look at why she's keeping it alive. So let's kind of flesh out that emotional inertia. Why does great Roman Catholic Aunt Petunia hold on to the things that she does and make your life miserable? Well, first is a personal sense of stability, right? This is the well in my day argument, right? This is, she's grown up with a certain worldview. And, let's be honest, it's just hard to shift from that. We all do need to grow. And Roman Catholic Aunt Petunia is no different. She needs to grow too. But at the same time, we have to realize that, our anchor points are hard to shift. And we get scared when they shift. So at the same time, maybe a little bit of grace to Roman Catholic Aunt Petunia. Not a lot, just a little. So okay, and so that's one reason. One reason for her emotional inertia. One reason why she's so insistent on, X beliefs, whether it's Roman Catholicism, evangelicalism, atheism, doesn't matter. So okay. So one is that personal sense of stability in my day. Two, religion can be a means of social power in the family. It's a big one. If you want to see who's benefiting from the religion, go walk into your Christmas dinner and talk about the pagan origins of Christmas, and you'll see the people who bark at you the loudest are the ones that benefit from religion the most in that situation. So we can talk about paganism and Christmas too.
That's another time.
That's another time.
You're already an hour and 8 minutes in, babe.
Yep. So let's wrap this up. All right. So religion can be a means of social power within the family, and the other thing is religion can also be a means of honest faith, and that's where things get kind of weird. Is that even racist Uncle George, right?
I thought it was Fred.
No, it's homophobic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Boy, you guys got a lot of bad family to work through. Oof. So even racist Uncle George, he has some honest faith there, right? And the problem is it's intertwined with all that garbage, and so that's one of the things that can make things really difficult. So how are we going to overcome this emotional inertia and towards positive change? We're going to take that knowledge piece, right? And we're going to take those good values, and then we're going to take that time and sacrifice. So you might say to me, well, Kevin, that's all well and good, but how do I do that? Well, you do that by setting healthy boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So as far as Roman Catholic Aunt Petunia is holding on to this because of a personal sense of stability. How do you deal with that? Well, you deal with that the way you deal with any past tradition. You affirm good values, but you call out injustices. Say, Aunt Petunia, I know that I know that your Roman Catholicism is important to you. I understand that this is how you view the world. I affirm the good things about your worldview. But there's some injustices that have to be called out here, and one of the injustices is that just because you got told you need to convert your household to Roman Catholicism, doesn't mean that you need to convert your household to Roman Catholicism. I need more than some dude in your organization. I need more authority than that. So affirm good values, call out injustices. 2, social power. All right, right? So the people that use religion as a means of social power within your family. Affirm valid reasons for leadership, right? If homophobic Uncle Fred actually has an idea that benefits the whole family, well, then it should probably be listened to, right? Tell homophobic Uncle Fred, seriously, get over your homophobic idea. But if he has a valid idea that benefits the family, then because it benefits the family, it should be listened to. But here's the other thing: we affirm valid reasons for leadership, but we insist on servant leadership, right? Whoever it is, if they're quoting their Bible or quoting whatever, right? You have a right to say, okay, but how does that help this family? How does this make us better? I need something more than your bare interpretation of something in English to get behind you. Okay, so 3rd, what about that honest faith piece? Well, we honor honest relationships, right? But we insist on reciprocity. Great Aunt Petunia, I know that your Roman Catholicism is how you interact with God. It makes you a better person. It makes you more charitable. It makes you care about the people around you. I need you to do the same with my faith, right? If what I'm getting into makes me a greedy, terrible person, then yes, stop me. But if my understanding of the divine is making me more charitable, care more about the suffering of others, then don't get in between me and my religion. So, affirm good values, call out injustices, affirm valid reasons for leadership, insist on servant leadership, honor honest relationships, but insist on reciprocity.
Very good point. Mm-hmm.
And final thing that we'll end here tonight with, when you're at that dinner table, focus on commonalities. I hope that at the end of this, you guys have realized, we've got a lot more. We've got a lot more in common than we thought, and that's a great thing. Take that with you, right? Be honest, be caring, focus on what you have in common, and
have a good escape plan if it goes bad.
And have a good escape plan if it goes bad. So
keep your keys in your hand.
Hopefully metaphorically, but if you got to be there physically, we understand. So that's it tonight. Now obviously, we can talk about, well, Kevin, what about highly toxic situations? If you have something in mind, like a personal family member, that kind of thing, come talk to me about it. We'll see what we can do. But just as a general and as a starter, that's it. Thank you guys. I hope this was informative. I hope it was helpful, and I hope that you guys have a happy holidays.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And I'm going to upload this on Facebook as well, so people can watch it later. Thanks so much, everybody. And if you have any questions or whatever, you can write them in the comments here or on the comments on the Facebook page. And have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.